You had a plan for today. You had things you were going to do, things you told yourself you would finally get around to. But the hours moved, and you moved with them. Or rather, you let them carry you. And now it is evening. And the question sitting at the back of your mind, the one you have been quietly avoiding, is whether this is just a bad week, or whether this is now who you are. This is not a video about time management. It is not going to sell you a morning routine. This is a video about something that was identified, with clinical precision, by a man who died before the internet existed. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist who spent 50 years studying not just individual minds, but the psychological life of entire civilizations. He watched the modern world take shape around him, and he was frightened by what he saw. Not by poverty, not by war, though he lived through two of them, but by something quieter, something that does not make headlines, something that happens inside a person without them ever noticing. He called what he saw the slow erosion of the individual, and he spent his career trying to name it precisely enough that people might recognize it in themselves. What follows is his diagnosis, and it will feel uncomfortably familiar. To understand what Jung was warning us about, you first have to understand the world he was watching transform. For most of human history, people lived in small communities. They had roles, traditions, a clear sense of where they stood in the world. Their identity was anchored, not always happily, but it was rooted in something. In place, in people, in purpose that was older than themselves. Then, industrialization tore that anchor out. People were uprooted from their communities, their trades, their inherited sense of meaning, and herded into anonymous cities. Jung watched this happen across one lifetime, and he documented what it did, not to the economy, not to politics, but to the human psyche. Thanks to industrialization, large portions of the population were uprooted and herded together in large centers. This produced an individual who was unstable, insecure, and suggestible. He wrote that in 1958, 67 years ago. Before social media, before the algorithm, before the smartphone existed. The conditions he described have not improved. They have found a more efficient machine. The same uprooting, the same anonymity, the same slow replacement of individual inner life with collective outer noise. And the same result playing out in a new generation with no language to name what is happening to them. Jung gave a precise name to the person who had fully dissolved into collective life. He called them the mass man. Not as an insult, as a clinical observation. The mass man is not someone who lacks intelligence. Many mass men are highly educated. The mass man is someone who has stopped living from the inside out and started living from the outside in. He does not ask what he thinks, what he wants, or what he believes. He absorbs what the crowd around him thinks, wants, and believes, and experiences this absorption as independent thought. The most insidious quality of this condition is its invisibility. From the inside, the mass man does not experience the loss of his individuality. He experiences himself as someone with correct views and informed opinions. He simply cannot see that those views arrived pre-assembled. The mass man has no individual differentiation. He is an abstract unit, easily interchangeable, easily manipulated, and he calls this freedom. A society of mass men is a society with no navigator. When the collective is thinking for the individual, when everyone is amplifying everyone else, there is no one left with enough independence to say, we are going the wrong way. Jung believed this was the defining civilizational crisis of his era. Not poverty, not external enemies. The loss of the individual self, multiplied across millions of people, was to Jung and the existential threat that all others fed from. But, and this is crucial, Jung never believed it was permanent. He believed it was a default, and defaults can be interrupted, starting with this: seeing it. Alongside the mass man condition, there's a second process Jung identified. He called it psychological deflation. If mass man describes the loss of individual thought, deflation describes the loss of individual power. Your belief, your felt sense, that what you do matters, that you have an effect on your own life, that your choices, your presence, your decisions are real. Deflation occurs when the meaningful decisions in a life are made by forces outside that life. When your employer decides your hours, your role, your worth. When the algorithm decides what deserves your attention. When the news cycle tells you what to fear today. The individual receiving all of this slowly stops initiating, stops trusting their own judgment, stops acting from conviction. The individual becomes increasingly dependent on the state, the employer, the media, and the more dependent he becomes, the less he is able to act from his own center. Jung noticed something painfully ironic. The more comfortable and optimized and managed modern life became, the more psychologically fragile the people within it became. As if the removal of difficulty slowly removed the capacity to handle difficulty. As if a life engineered to be frictionless quietly engineered the person within it to require frictionlessness. And so deflation does not look dramatic. It does not look like a crisis. It looks like someone who has quietly stopped believing that what they do changes anything. Who has learned, in 1,000 small, forgettable moments, to wait for permission rather than to act from conviction. Now we come to the mechanism accelerating both of these processes simultaneously. Jung called the broader phenomenon the danger of psychic epidemics, the mass spread of compulsive thought and behavior through a population that has lost its individual resistance. Today, that epidemic has a delivery system Jung could not have imagined. The greatest danger threatening modern man is the loss of his soul, not through external violence, but through the slow surrender of inner life to outer noise. The machine does not need to force you into it. It is designed to exploit every psychological vulnerability you already have. Your need for novelty, your fear of missing something, your hunger for social approval, your discomfort with silence. These are not weaknesses to be ashamed of. They are human, and they are being industrialized. What the machine extracts, quietly, efficiently, is your relationship with your own mind. Boredom is not an enemy. Jung regarded it as a doorway to the unconscious, to original thought, to the self below the surface. Destroy the capacity for boredom, and you destroy the access point to the deepest parts of yourself. And so, an entire generation walks through life never having met themselves, never having been bored enough to wonder. All of this, the mass psychology, the deflation, the distraction, converges on a single endpoint that Jung identified and named. He called it the general neurosis of our times. Not a clinical disorder, something beneath disorder. A pervasive background sense that life is happening to you rather than from you. That despite all the comfort, the access, the connection, and the entertainment, something essential is not there, and you cannot name what it is. Jung recorded that a full third of his patients came to him with no diagnosable mental illness. They were suffering, often in his words, from the senselessness and emptiness of their lives. They had built what society told them would be enough, and found that it was not. According to Jung, this is not a personal failing. It is the inevitable product of a civilization that has spent 200 years perfecting the outer world: wealth, technology, efficiency, while completely neglecting the inner one. And without tending to the inner world, nothing in the outer one will ever feel like enough. Everything we have described so far sounds and is bleak. Jung did not soften it. He was not in the business of comfortable reassurance. But he was honest, and his honest assessment included this: the way back is real. It is available to anyone willing to take it. He called the process individuation, the lifelong, often uncomfortable work of becoming who you actually are. Not the self you perform for others, not the identity handed to you by your family, your culture, your algorithm. The self that exists when you stop performing, when you stop consuming, when you stop filling the silence. Man needs difficulties. They are necessary for health. What concerns us is only an excessive amount of them. Jung was not prescribing suffering. He was describing a reorientation from outer to inner, from consumption to creation, from waiting for instruction to acting from conviction, from a life designed around external validation to a life navigated by internal authority. This is not a weekend retreat. It is not a subscription. It is not a productivity app. It is the slow, daily, unglamorous work of asking, what do I actually think? What do I actually want? And then, with whatever resistance that brings, living accordingly. Carl Jung wrote for people who sensed something was wrong, with themselves, with the world they were moving through, but could not find the words for it. Now you have the words. Mass man. Psychological deflation. The general neurosis of our times. These are not abstract diagnoses. They are descriptions of what happens to every person who allows their inner life to be managed by forces that profit from its absence. So I leave you with one question. Not a task, not a challenge. Just a question to sit with away from any screen. Where in your life have you outsourced your thinking? Just one place. That is all. So, because the moment you can name it, it is no longer invisible. And once it is visible, you have a choice. If this gave you something to think about, subscribe. Every week we examine the ideas that explain the world we are living in and what it is doing to the people living in it. The next video is about Jung's persona, the mask you wear so often you begin to forget your face is underneath it. See you there.